You were born in Cairo, and you left Egypt and came to Canada at a younger age. And you are a Canadian artist, Egyptian Canadian artist, a hyphenated Canadian artist. So I would like you to share with us how your time in Canada has impacted your trajectory as an artist.
Well, I think this is a very complicated question. And it may take a very long time. And some people may tell me, why don't you go back where you came from? So I don't know if I would like to discuss this.
I think we'll take that risk, and we have some time, so.
Well, I will tell you something, is that when I arrived to Montreal, I was thinking of doing my graduate studies, but then I started losing my hearing. I started having problems with my ears. So I decided that it was better to paint because at least you are silent. So I went to Concordia and I started a course in painting and music because I felt that music and drawing are intellectual in itself. So, and the line of music and the line of drawing have coincide somewhere. And so I went to Concordia, but my hearing became very bad. So I couldn't continue on music. But I mean, you can always have the rhythm in your brain, in your mind. And anyway, after graduation, the situation in Montreal was very different. Because at that time, in the early 70s, people were not interested in art. And if you wanted to break into the art world, you had to be more than 50. But then I came to Toronto, and people in Toronto were more open to international art. But also, they regarded it as an investment. So I lived between Montreal and Toronto because I realized that the only way to earn some money was to come to Toronto to pay the rent in Montreal. And eventually I came and stayed here for about a year and a half. Anyway, it was very difficult to survive because most people identified me as being an Egyptian, but I am Armenian. But I was born in Cairo. Like I would come here and I mean, they told me you will go back to your country or you better go back. So it was very difficult to survive. So I decided that this society anyway is not very interested in art. And there was not much happening. And I realized that the major interest of most people in Montreal was to drink alcohol and smoke. What did you say?
And talk. And talk.
No, they didn't talk much. And it was very interesting in Montreal because most people did not speak. You know, it was the time before the referendum. So most people refused to speak, except very little English, none. It was mainly French. Anyway, and it was fine. I had some friends, but not very. I mean, it was for me very difficult to relate because, you know, when you don't hear, it's very difficult to live. Finally, they realized that I had lost my ears, so they gave me I got hearing aids. And I realized that it was, most people are not very open except to what is known. And they are not interested in painting anyway. So it was more of a photography, but then photography was not important. It was important how big everything was. So, you know, I didn't really understand it and the confusion. I only came forth that art has a very small and weak place in North America. Maybe in New York, because it is a very big business center.
I know you're a very keen observer of the world and you travel a lot. Would you like to share with us how you feel about Toronto now, after so many years?
Well, I learned something, is that they are saying less they don't have money. They are saying now it's the country which is too expensive for them. But I think that most people live very well, so they must have money. I think it's very the discretion of people to say I have no money, because people are discreet over their money, but they are not discreet about other things. But it was a very conventional society here in the 70s, very, very conservative. I mean, people went to bed at 7, I think. But gradually it opened up.
Yeah. And you like it? You like what you see
I
now?
like Toronto because at least I don't have to suffer of using 2 words in English and 2 words in French. So it's easier. It's fine, and it's a milder climate.
Yeah. Well, we had many conversations about the world, about Canada, about the art world, about everything that's happening, and lots of questions about how things are happening in the world. And in those conversations, of course, we talked about the characters, the Canadian characters that you've selected to add to the chess game. And one of them became really clear for me in those conversations that, Canada has lost something since the time you've come. Maybe has gained some things, but has also lost some things. And that's Lester B. Pearson. We were talking about kind of the kind of Canada that Lester B. Pearson embodies as a historical figure. And you are, as I mentioned, a keen observer of places you go to, but you pay very close attention to history, and you're interested in history. And you take inspiration from historical events and you bring them to life through your work. Why is it important to revisit those historical moments?
Well, I think that, maybe it is a cliche that I'm saying, that the world is in a circle and then things return. But the question is that we are affected. The world is affected by its past. Although it looks forward to the future, but it's very difficult to cut through. Even if World War I finished, it created World War II, and the World War II created an effect on people's minds, and the system of war and conflict changed. So in many ways, the past affects people's minds. People do not forget their suffering, but I think people do not know how their suffering is creating more suffering for other people. They are blinded. They only see of their egotistical presence of their own suffering. And this is the question, is that the world is in a constant state of creating certain energies that do not resolve themselves. Like the French Revolution, they killed the queen. They killed the king and then they killed the queen. And then but the revolution perpetuates itself, other people took over. Mm-hmm. And even when there was the Egyptian revolution of the Arab Spring, they wanted to bring the president and to be decapitated in the middle of the Liberty Square, which is very interesting because that's Liberty Square that there is now in Cairo. It's exactly where the king and the queen of France were decapitated, and there is an Egyptian obelisk there. So you see how things transmit itself.
Well, you mentioned the queen, so Marie Antoinette, and she's a character in the chess game. A lot of the characters that you are collected for this purpose and you're interested in for this work, they are full of contradictions, right? They are complicated people. And I think that for me, when I look at the work and when I talk about the work, I like to remind everyone that even those who we celebrate for certain, or even those who we vilify for various reasons, there's always more to an individual than what history tells us about them. Why is it important to look at individuals?
Well, you know, the main issue is like the Canadians decided to have Canadian character. The Austrian wanted just Austrian character. So I did all the Austrians that were important in the world. And in reality, the Austrians were are very important people. They are more discreet in showing their importance. For example, Hitler was an Austrian. And the reason why the World War happened is because he was refused from the art school.
In Vienna, yeah.
So instead, he was so angry that he became a great orator. I mean, a very stupid orator, but he knew how to affect people's mind, because I think he wanted to go to the fine art school and he was rehearsing how to
build his
Yes,
argument,
and then, of course, in Munich, he made this exhibition of the desirable and undesirable, and all those that people say that he didn't fit in were considered degenerate.
Yeah.
So you see, this is where the world is. So, but I didn't do him. I did instead the man who assassinated
Franz Ferdinand.
Yes,
Franz Ferdinand, yeah.
because that created World War I, which created a man like Hitler.
Yes.
And then I created the man who wrote Zionism, and the woman who was against Zionism.
Yeah.
Then I did Josephine Baker, who was a black woman from America. She was one who managed to get out of being black and slave, and she married a very rich industrialist in France. She became a performer, and she became an informer for the French government, and that's why she's in the capital with all the great heroes of France. Besides Lester Pearson, Oscar Peterson, maybe Egoyan, and who else there is?
Frederick Banting.
Banting.
Frederick Banting.
Yes, I did not yet explore the Canadians who affected the world internationally. But most probably there is Leonard Cohen, and there are many more that we didn't put because they are men and not women. So because we didn't have enough women. But it can happen. Maybe I should have put some hockey players.
The great.
But you know, the great
one,
Nazi of that I have drawn here, he was a #1 hockey player.
As I said, complicated people. Complicated people with complex lives.
But he was very good at the languages, he was very good in sports, and he was a very good doctor, and then #2 Nazi.
Yeah. And why was it important to tell his story?
About this man?
Yeah.
Because it says how the fugitives, how people after World War managed to escape to other places and continue on living a life without feeling any remorse. He felt it was fine because he followed the orders. Because if he didn't follow the orders, he would have been killed. Anyway, I think it's very important to have this man here.
Yeah.
He was Austrian.
Yes, yeah. So the time of change drawings that are installed on the wall have 3 chapters, one of them being the French Revolution, then the Russian Revolution, and the final chapter is dedicated to Albert Heim, and this is who we're talking about, who was known as Dr. Death for having worked for the Nazis and performed medical experiments in the camps. And he managed to escape at the end of the Second World War without being brought to justice, and lived a normal life in Cairo, Egypt, without ever being brought to justice. So Anna is telling that story in very particular details, and why it is important to not forget those.
He converted to Islam. That's how he disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, so he changed his identity. But he also managed to create a new identity where, he was known as a good neighbor and a good employer, and someone that nobody in his circles in Cairo knew of his true identity. So this kind of disappearance into into a new identity and a new world. And Anna, you talked before in other interviews, and you mentioned that artists and art play a role in healing.
Yes.
Can you tell us?
Yes, people have asked me this question. I think that it is something that cannot be explained. It is something to be felt.
To be felt, yeah.
Maybe I escaped the art question.
So the invitation to consider the historical events and those details.
It can solve a conflict.
Yeah.
And once a conflict is solved, it heals. But it depends how the interpreter, people, I mean, haven't you read a book? And after you read the book, you have solved a mental situation that solved your soul, your thinking.
Yes.
It heals you.
Yeah.
It can relieve your mental difficulties.
Right. Yeah.
But it depends which art you are looking at. I'm not speaking indefinitely in general.
Yeah.
Color is a very fantastic phenomenon.
And
words are very potent.
Yes. And color, my next question was gonna go in that direction and talk about, you mentioned how you started by making paintings. And we see here that's you're continuing to paint and to draw, and color plays a very important role. And you work with particular pigments. You use paper mostly, right?
Yes.
Paper.
Yes, this is done with wax and caustic.
And caustic, yeah.
Yes. And this is done with ink. These drawings.
The pigments that you use are very particular.
Well, it depends. Yeah, it depends what I find. I mean, there are natural pigments that, of course, are better, but these are done synthetic pigments.
We are showing also in a display case, kind of at the entrance into the gallery, two notebooks, accordion style notebooks that are also extremely beautiful. And one of them is depicting street scenes from Cairo and Berlin, very vibrant colors again. And then the other one is depicting artificial illumination, so electrical bulbs. And that has been a theme in your notebooks. So Anna has a lot of notebooks. She carries them while she travels, and they become almost diaries of her journeys. And can you, the illumination, the motif of the illumination of the bulb is very common. And you associate that with enlightenment?
Well, I say about false enlightenment.
False enlightenment.
Yes, we think we are aware and we know, but we don't know. That's what he's saying. I mean that we have wisdom, but we don't have. We know, but we don't know. It's all these contradictions of the human mind. It's like a light bulb or an electricity that passes through the brain. I think the brain has an electrical system that functions. Anyway, it lights.
It lights up. It lights us, and yeah, it.
You know, I don't really like to talk about my artwork.
Okay. Well, we're not going to talk about your artwork anymore then, but then let's talk about something that happened to celebrate your artwork that happened while you were here in Toronto, which is the recent, you being awarded the Boghiguian Prize. So I would like to, congratulate you again, and this is it felt so great to have you here while this news was shared with the world.
Well, I'm not very happy.
You're not very happy about it?
No, because it says that my work is only valid after 2012.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we talked about this, like the art world and the kind of how the art world validates certain artists when it feels that is the moment to validate them. And you said that you left Canada in order to have opportunities to show. So I know we're kind of talking about your artwork, but we're talking about your life trajectory.
But no, you can talk about it because you're talking about the content.
Yes. So,
because everybody interprets the way they want to interpret. And if I say something, it is very complex, you understand? To be able to express what is in your mind in words.
I just was going to ask exactly that question of why, because even when we talk about you as an artist and we introduce you to our audiences, we do talk about this moment of 2012, right? Which was you being included in Documenta. But prior to that, you have been included in other exhibitions.
Yes, I tell you, in the first thing, I was involved in a big exhibition. It was with Catherine David in two or three. In with the beat and in Barcelona at Tapia Center and to another place in Norway, I don't know where.
And it was a group exhibition that, so Catherine David is a very well-known French curator, and she
was the curator of Documenta, I think 9.
9, yes. And she developed a project around representations from the Arab world, right? So that was the project.
She used Lebanon, Egypt, and Iraq.
And those exhibitions traveled throughout Europe. I remember I was a student in London in 2005, and there were still parts of that exhibition traveling in Europe, in Germany. So so this way of you being considered part of the Egyptian art scene, right? So that was kind of how that narrative of the exhibition.
There were people who lived in Egypt. There was a Frenchman. So it wasn't that you had to be an Egyptian to be in it.
But it was being
you have lived in Egypt.
Yeah.
You had to be part of the culture.
So it's in a way kind of bringing us back to my first question, which was exactly about this kind of what I was referring to.
It's called Arab representation.
Yeah, about the hyphenated identities of artists, right? Like artists that are living in different places and have different citizenships, and we see that a lot here in Canada. So we're kind of coming full circle back to where we started. But we are really happy to have you as a Canadian artist here in Toronto, and to show your work. And I think that we will see you again.
I hope so.
I would like to ask you to join me in thanking Anna for her generosity in answering my questions today and indulging my questions.
Well, I think that I escaped a lot of answers. Well, I have to thank you for coming.